Okay, we are official. So welcome everybody to the webinar tonight. My name's Liz. I'm a farmer down in Southeast Indiana, and I am in love with this really cool little part of the USDA called SARE. I don't work for SARE. Somebody asked me that recently. They're like, you kind of proselytized for them. Do they pay you? No, I work for a group called Partners in Food and Farming. And we're just trying to connect all sorts of folks who work on food and farming in Indiana. And one other hat I wear is with the Hoosier Young Farmers Coalition. And so together we're doing all sorts of things trying to help SARE grant recipients get the word out about their projects. And we're putting a fun little spin on it tonight. We're going to talk about what's it like to apply for a grant and specifically to do that as a person of color in Indiana. And so we have Lauren McAllister joining us from Bloomington, Indiana, to share about her grant that she received. And you might be wondering, like, well, what is a SARE grant? Tell me more. So I'm going to give you the 30-second version. Essentially, a SARE grant, a SARE Farmer-Rancher Grant, is a pot of money that farmers across the Midwest can apply for to test out or trial some innovative idea in sustainable agriculture. And it either has to be innovative, like no one's ever tried it, brand new idea, or maybe it's been proven somewhere else, but not in your community, in your setting, in your state, something like that. And so it's innovative for where you are or your situation. And so there's all sorts of different SARE grants funded every single year. And you can ask for $9,000 and up. It's a decent pot of money. You get 2 years-ish to run the project. And you can pay for things like your labor to run the project and do the thing. You can pay for some supplies. You can pay for testing or analysis if you need things like soils tested. You can fund a helper. And Lauren can tell us about that because she employed other folks using her SARE grant funds to test out a really neat idea. And so I think, oh yeah, drop it in the chat. There's SARE.org/grants. You can read all about it. And they have awesome webinars and videos about how to apply. But what we wanted to do tonight was kind of take a step back. We're going to talk some nuts and bolts for sure, but also just to think about, like, what's the experience like as a farmer and specifically as a farmer of color, and how do SARE grants let you move your farm forward in a really cool way. So with that, I was thinking I'd get out of the way. I'm going to pin Lauren so that she's nice and big here because she taught me how to do that. There we go. And Lauren, would you introduce yourself and tell us about your SARE grant just to start?
Yeah, that's fantastic. First of all, thanks, Liz. This is a great opportunity to cultivate just more awareness around SARE grants, but also how we can do it collectively, because that's a lot of what inspired me to do this grant. So I'm Lauren McAllister. I run 3 Flock Farm in Ellettsville, Indiana. We have 25 acres. I'm a rancher, so we've got sheep, 33 at this point, and then I grow food and work really exclusively with People's Cooperative Market in order to provide accessible, local, nutrient-dense food to vulnerable populations. So my SARE grant is pretty narrow. It's about mushroom cultivation. So you may ask, mushrooms, delicious. I don't care where they come from. That's not really the question. It's how to produce more. Mine specifically was targeting oyster mushrooms and lion's mane mushrooms. So I had the question of how could we use a byproduct like spent grain from producing beer and coffee ground from producing coffee? How could we use that in order to cultivate more mushrooms at home and specifically for the amateur farmer rancher? I think one of the first steps that comes with a SARE grant is even knowing what SARE means. I didn't know. It means sustainable agriculture, research, and education. So when you think about it, it's already inviting you in to read about the projects and the work that they've already done. That's how I started getting an idea about a project. So I actually went to the website, and I encourage you to go there now along with me, and SARE.org/grants./ it really opened up the resources, the learning, and the projects, and I thought it was so interesting how much research had already been done for ranchers and farmers to answer questions like why you would use diatomaceous earth or not, where you would plant versus why. Lots of those questions, individual farmers and ranchers have already done the research, and so you can read through their project. So if you go to the website, it says search a project. You could just put in the title, anything, and it will come up. If you search for mushroom cultivation, my project shows up. And when I was looking for what to apply for, this is where I started. So I went and I looked for mushrooms. I searched and saw if there were any. There weren't. And so if you have a subject that you're just genuinely interested about that can really help your farm and specifically farms around you, this is where you can get started. Go to the projects page. You can actually narrow your field with region, state, commodities, practices, all of the ways that it'll show you what's already available. So from there, then I said, well, what would these projects do? And so clicking what we do clarified. I'm going to take my research and actually inform, host a field day and a webinar just like this so that I could get the word out about the impact of the research that I've done. So once I narrowed into one of those questions, it was much easier. If you'd like, I would love it if you could drop into the chat a question that you have that's naturally arising on your farm. Maybe it's, should we do a cover crop or not? What kind of cover crop? Lots of people talk about buckwheat, but maybe at your farm there's a more nutrient dense, easier to grow, tolerant to your climate variety. So that's a great question. And I encourage you to drop those questions in the chat. It may inspire other people to think about their hypothesis for their project. So once you figured out, okay, I'm going to do all this research, I know what project I'm going to choose. I've seen that it's innovative, like Liz mentioned before, that it hasn't been done yet, or at least not in my region. Because of Indiana, I went to the North Central region. And so I actually reached out on the resources and learning page in the North Central region, and I read some of the reports and the grantees and what was actually hot in the streets. Do you know what I mean? Like, what is SARE interested in, what North Central interested in, and what are farmers who are like me interested in? And so as a Black farmer, a lot of it is about soil remediation, not just tilling, but also making a sustainable agricultural choice. And so I read a lot about how you can use wool and different materials as a byproduct. So I knew that it was available to me that if I found a byproduct that could cultivate another product, that would be a great way for me to diminish my startup costs for my farm. So I read a few of the booklets, the guides, the videos. I narrowed my search to North Central, and then I reached out. So Joan, Benjamin, and Aaron were extremely helpful. I asked from the very beginning if they could meet with me and talk about the process. It's not necessarily hard, it's just a lot to do to get the paperwork done. So if I've chosen a project, I have a question, North Central thinks it's innovative, what comes next? It would really be planning out how you're going to spend your budget. So I have this idea, I have a project question, but what can the budget do to help me answer that question? So since I was cultivating mushrooms, I really needed a sterilization process. So I asked for some pressure cookers. I'm using mushrooms, so I asked for funding to actually get the inoculation, which is the beginning of the process for mushroom cultivation, books, and then I wanted to pay other farmers and a research assistant in order to spread around the resources. The other farmers really helped me understand the process of an amateur versus a beginning farmer versus a, what I would say, seasoned farmer, and how I could cater the information that I was gleaning and the questions I was asking to those different audiences. I actually reached out to a local farm and said, would you use the product I've created? Would you eat it? Would you test it for quality so that I can get an idea if other people would actually use my project information? So that's part of the budget. And then finally, I thought about how to pay myself and to get enough of the resources all at once. As a Black, Indigenous, or a farmer rancher of color, you are allowed to request money ahead of time. Most of the time, SARE is giving out a reimbursement model. What's that? That means that you would buy the pressure cooker, you would buy the inoculation products ahead of time, and then send in receipts, and SARE would be able to send you the money back. But because I'm a Black farmer and rancher, I was able to request half of my budget, so it's 50% ahead of time. And then I was allowed to get more funding after I completed reporting. But let's go back. You found a question, you decided the project is innovative, you reached out to get resources, you looked at other materials that are already available, and now you've set your budget. I would highly recommend sending in the budget and talking to the representatives about how likely it is for this amount to be funded. I would compare past grantees and their budgets, since there is an inherent limitation on the amount of money that each person can get. Collaboration is the answer there. So if you have multiple farmers working together, it expands your budget. This is a great point. Maybe it is a question that your farm can't answer on its own, but a collective of farmers can. So when we get to the end of that product line, I've sent in my application. It's really a matter of setting up your work. I got started ahead of getting reimbursed because it was part of my project plan, but you set your project calendar. So if you want to start 5 months after you get your check or before you get the check, it's really up to you. I think that's my favorite part, that it was so flexible in the sense that if I didn't want to start my project right away, I didn't have to. But Liz is correct that there's a limit on how long you're able to have to complete the final report. There's a midway point report, and that's often when you get reimbursed, but the final report is what they will post on the website. So if you go to grant management system, projects.sare.org, you'll be able to see this login. You will actually have a login. You'll be able to not only search for different projects, like I mentioned earlier, but also upload all of your work. So you aren't turning it in and then they're uploading it, you're doing it yourself. I appreciate that kind of autonomy. It helped me see what other farmers would be reading was actually helpful. And so at the end, I really enjoyed seeing how my research compared to other research, even though it wasn't the same topic, but in the way that it was formatted. So I sent in 2 drafts before the final report, and they gave me feedback, which was not only helpful, but illuminative. Like, it was nice to know that there are some parts of my project that were really clear and other parts that I needed to be more collaborative. The final project is usually due 24 months or somewhere between 20 and 24 months after the funding. But because of COVID-19, I was given an extension. Because of that, I was able to really gather more data and create a more cohesive final project report. In my project report, I actually created manual pages so you could print out what I've created and use it as a reference tool. Other people create videos. I also created a short video, and people have field days. Due to COVID-19, I didn't have my field day on my farm, but the field day is one of the final components of the project's grant management. You want to host, if not a webinar like this, but an in-person experience so that other farmers can ask questions, talk about your process, and really see if it can apply to their farm in a sustainable way. I think a lot of what comes after the final report is being able to practice. So I would encourage you to reach out to other farmers and talk about your project ahead of time so that by the time you have a field day or a webinar, you're really comfortable and you feel like the information has impact. That's a short overview. I'd like if somebody could ask a few questions, and then I can talk a little bit more after that. So if there are questions, this would be a great time.
All right, we've got one in the chat and then we've got one with a hand up. So let's start with the chat. Glenda typed, how many of the grant recipients here have, if you've received the grant, have continued your work from the grant? So Lauren, have you guys continued the mushroom cultivation and using the coffee grounds and the spent brewer's grains even after the grant was done?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And yes, absolutely. Because of the grant funding, it kind of kickstarted the project. and we were able to maximize the product. So mushrooms in particular have a high yield and a high profit margin.
Right.
So because of that, I was able to recoup and keep producing mushrooms.
Yay.
Nice. All right, Kathy, lay your question on us.
Thank you, Lauren. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we've got you, Kathy.
I can hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
great. Sorry, I'm way out in the country. I never know how good my connection is. One of the things that I've seen, and I went out and looked at projects, is, it's natural. Some projects are going to fail. So do the SARE people talk to you about failures and how to handle that? And will you still get paid, like if there's some type of failure and you can't finish the project?
Yes, they will. Yes, they will.
You're amazing. That is an excellent question. And the answer is yes. And that's what I love. So when you think about research and education, it's like, then they need to know that it failed, right? Like that's also the point. If I would have tried and both methods would have failed, that's still great information that they want other farmers and ranchers to have access to.
That's right. That's right.
Mhm. They did not talk to me though about that. They were confident in my application. And they were confident that I was going to be able to accomplish it, mostly because they have so many resources and they're available the entire time. So I think they approve projects that they feel confident that either way, either outcome will be valid to the SARE website and its mission. Oh, what's the SARE mission? To advance the whole American research. Like all of it. It's quite mighty. What's up, John?
Hello. I just wanted to share on that also. I've also had a SARE grant that I had received a few years back. And due to COVID, things happened that there were some few aspects that I wasn't able to complete due to the fact that nobody was meeting up during that time. And the individuals I worked with at the SARE project worked with me on revamping and changing a few narratives so that I was able to complete a different portion. So they will work with you on that if you run into something that becomes a snag. For example, recently. If you'd have put in a year ago, hey, I want to do this and gas is going to cost me this amount of money. And then all of a sudden gas jumps up 2-3 times of what it is, they'll work with you on that and say, all right, well, maybe we can take away from here, add over here, or do something else. And so I just want everybody to know that they're not looking for you to fail. They want you to succeed, and they're willing to work with you in order to make it a successful endeavor. That's it.
Brilliant. Excellent example. And I think even specifically, there's up to 20% of the budget that you can change. So there's plenty of room to adapt. And that's what that midpoint report is about. You tell them it's going well, it's not, here's what I need more of this or less of that. And I think ultimately, like John is saying, they're interested in your success. Any other questions? You know me, I'll keep talking. Okay, so I wanted to clarify who can apply. Oh, wait. Yeah, tell me.
Oh, yeah. A lot of this seems a little overwhelming. I'm just trying to really understand the SARS program in itself. So basically how I can get started is basically just going on the website that you provided and starting with that program. So this is really my first experience in finding out about it. So if you can just expound a little bit more about the program and what it actually offers, because this is new for me. I'm just a farmer. I want to say that I'm experienced, but by listening to you, I feel so inexperienced in the mushrooms. That's so amazing and that's so wonderful. And I feel that I just need to learn a lot and just really need to listen right now.
I mean, that's part of it, right? So like I was going to say, who can apply? There's a lot of people who can apply for these, not just farmers, ranchers, researchers, grad students. So you don't have to do it alone. You could find someone else who has questions, or bring a grad student onto your farm and say, here's some of the issues I'm having or opportunities that I need to address. How can you help me? And then this grant, the SARE grant, can help you fund them finding out for you, right? So a grad student, a researcher, an extension agent, all of those people can collaborate with you. And I think it's so awesome already that you're on the call, that you're seeking this information. And I think the next step is just asking what kind of project would really benefit your farm? What
Well, like in
questions?
particular that you know that I'm part of, how can the SAR grant benefit me? I'm already hearing that it can benefit me, but in the respect of, okay, we're farmers. I've always farmed, but I've never sold anything in particular. I was introduced to the grant, right, that we're part of right now. What do you think overall, or just at that level? I don't know. So I'm just trying to learn and trying to extract information to see how it might benefit me in applying for the grant,
Definitely.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So one of the things when you scroll down the page with /grants on it, at the very bottom, it says what projects are eligible. And so just a few right off the top are pest and weed management. So if you're on your farm, you use something specific that works, that's one of the projects. And you could search their database and see if other people use that method. Cover crops, if cover crops do well or don't do well, given the method that you fertilize the soil with, water irrigation, high tunnels, crop rotations, food systems, marketing, all of these topics. I think once you search the database for reports, you'll start seeing how many projects, how wide the definition of project is. So right now, SARE has funded $361 million since 1998. And they've funded 8,187 projects. That's what they do. They are interested in offering competitive grants to farmers and ranchers to improve the sustainability of the United States agriculture. I'm literally reading from their website. Right. And so knowing that that's their interest, I think for the farmer rancher definition, it's saying test a practice or a system through on-farm experimentation. So if your farm grows strawberries and you want to know if you add a particular fertilizer, let's say mushroom compost, you could buy it from me and you put it on your strawberries and see with a controlled bed that doesn't have it and your bed that has the mushrooms, if it improves and how much. That would be a great practice to do on farm to experiment. And then you would give the report to SARE. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
No, thank you. And so I'll just talk a little bit longer and then we will ask more questions. So one of the reasons why SARE matters for Black and Indigenous and people of color, like I mentioned before, is that you can get paid ahead of time, but also because the USDA in its effort is saying that it wants to have this open sourced information. Why does that matter? So a lot of hierarchical systems in America mean they really harness their power by gatekeeping information. So you have to pay, you have to be a student, you have to be in a club, you have to be in the military to get information. This is an opportunity to open source or actually give open access to the projects so that anybody interested can learn. That's really significant because the inherent barriers of institutional racism means that Black and Indigenous and farmers, ranchers of color don't have access to the information that can really help their farms be sustainable. So beyond getting by or just making it through, we're looking for ways to help our farms thrive. In my experience, because of how resourceful and innovative Black and Indigenous farmers of color are, I see a great opportunity for those innovative ideas to be open source for all the Black and Indigenous farmers of color across the nation. And that is one of the benefits that highlighted to me the significance of this work. Part of it is that research can seem intimidating, but if you read through a few projects, you'll see how simple the questions are, how straightforward the data is, and how reporting that way is actually beneficial for the audience. Like I said before, you'll want to think, who am I writing this to, and why would they want to read it? I really tailored down my report into 2 short pieces, 2 short manual sheets, so that you can see what my method was and actually replicate it. So if there are other farmers in North Central who want to do mushroom cultivation, they'll have the resources that I used, the budget that I used, the question that I asked, and all the data that comes afterwards. One of the last parts I want to bring up specifically is collaboration. Collaboration is essential because sustainability is built on collaboration. So if there is a way for you to answer a question with a group of farmers, a group of ranchers, or even a cooperative, that way you can continue to ask these questions every single year. So by doing this first SARE grant, I'm now inspired to do another SARE grant and start asking even more questions so that farmers in North Central can have the data, up-to-date data. And that's the last part about open source I wanted to make sure we all understood, that even information that's really pertinent is often kept away until whoever published it or whoever's making money allows for the open source information, the information to become open source. So there might be data right now that could give farmers and ranchers pertinent, relevant, repeatable information, but we don't have access to it just simply because of hierarchical monetary needs. This way, we can actually incorporate these processes now, and hopefully we can work together to continue to get more grants and have more researchers and more Black and Indigenous farmers to do this kind of work. If there are any questions, I would love them. Okay,
Lauren,
thank you for stopping me. Great.
I have a thing to ask or share, both, I guess. So one thing that I've learned from you in the last like 6 months or so is that it's so important to ask, like, who's making the decisions and how are the decisions made in whatever it is we're talking about. And the way I got to know SARE was that I served on the review committee for these grants. So the SARE Farmer-Rancher Grants, they pay farmers across the North Central region, which is just their version of saying the Midwest, right? Across the Midwest, to review applications. So like I raise livestock, so I was put on the livestock committee. And so over the winter, I read like 30 applications and I ranked them all based on my own experience on my farm and whether or not I thought the application had a really innovative idea and if it would be viable. Like, could you actually pull off this project with that amount of money, with that amount of people and resources? And then we got together in person. I don't know if they still do it in person, but we got together in person and talked as a group of farmers about like which of the projects should be picked. And it was a really cool democratic process. Like we all scored them, and whichever ones sort of sifted to the top, we looked at them again as a group and said like, okay, did we miss any? Does anybody have one that they felt like, no, this one's really good. I know maybe there were some weaknesses to it, but I think it's got legs and we should fund it. And then we made our suggestion to the SARE Advisory Council, I believe is what it's called. And that's also made up of representatives of farmers and folks across the Midwest. And then they basically approved our slate. And so what I want to say about that is like, I think it's a pretty transparent process, which is awesome. And also, I know I just saw an email the other day that right now they're looking for people to serve on that grant review committee. And that is a paid gig, which when I was in year 1, 2, 3 in my farm, having a little bit of cash coming in the winter was really critical. And I think it would be awesome to have more farmers of color from Indiana on that committee making those decisions. You can't apply for a grant if you're serving on the committee. Like, you can't do them at the same time, but you see the grant process from behind the scenes and you learn a lot about how it works. And then you could apply later. So I had my Lauren hat on. I was thinking about decisions. Did you have, like, did they give you feedback about your application? Or did you have any like second guessing about your application, or was it like, did you feel really good? What was that like?
Yeah, so I'll have to point out from a point of privilege that I live in. So I live in a privilege point around education. So I've already written grants before, so I wasn't as hesitant to do that process. But I think in terms of confidence, yes, because I had reached out and asked for help. And Liz has taught me that Indiana doesn't submit a lot of grant applications for SARE. So we could all be submitting more of them. I crunched the numbers to see the percentage of applications to approvals, and it was 50-50. I'm gonna be honest. So it was kind of like flipping a coin. For me, it felt totally reasonable to apply to something that 50% of the time you're getting funded. But I think the last part, Liz, that I really enjoy you bringing up is just who's deciding. So it might be interesting before you apply to be on the board and see what it looks like to review the projects. And then you may come up with an idea just by hearing from other people. I would say I did about 20 hours of research, looking through the grant, the projects that have been funded, looking through the grant application, looking through similar projects, so maybe projects that are close to mushroom cultivation, but not exactly. It probably took me 20 hours to do all of that before I decided that this was a viable option for me to manage for my farm. So you'll have to weigh that out too. How many hours can you commit to not only coming up with the idea, administering it, and reporting? Are there more questions?
There's a new one in the chat. I'm just gonna add the application for this year is due December 1, but it's always due in early December. So it's totally fine to say, like, I think I have an idea, but I'm not for sure. I'm not ready to apply yet this year. Or to put in an application, and it's okay if it's not perfect, because maybe you'll get feedback that helps and you'll refine it next year. But okay, so Marianne has a question. She's asking, how did you come up with the idea and question for the project, and did SARE help you make it more specific?
They did not make it more specific. I was pretty narrow. I think the idea came out of seeing tons and tons of waste. Okay, it was quite remarkable to me how much coffee grounds, how many pounds and pounds and pounds of brewer's grain was just being put into plastic bags and thrown into the dump. It blew my mind. So I started researching on what to do with it. And because our farm was already interested in cultivating mushrooms, that was already our goal, I had to educate myself. I thought I would just do logs. So that's one method of inoculating wood logs, preferably soft or hard, depending on the kind of mushroom. What I didn't understand was how coming in with the idea of creating a cyclical or circular economy would be so attractive. That's just how I think about cost savings. So if I don't have to buy the product to help me produce another product, I'm thinking this will be a higher margin. Closing the gap with meeting the brewers and the coffee producers, that's really where the SARE grant gave me the confidence. I had a reason to show up and say, hey, do you like mushrooms? Because I'm cultivating them. And that's that collaborative part that I added into my application. I think it's important to ask a question that is innovative but simple. And so being specific means you have to make it more simple. Trying to do a complex, multi-level method would mean that multiple people need to be included. That's what I would suggest. And I really enjoy the idea, because I do slaughter as a rancher, that I would be producing something that wasn't dependent on that. So mushrooms was balancing out our farm and the way that we produce food for a plethora, a widely diverse group and community members. Thank you for that question. Okay. So the last part I wanted to make sure we talked about is collaborating with other farmers and ranchers to do the research. One part of my application did include this. So I actually had a budget line that said I would give people money for their time. So instead of sending a survey to 10 random coffee shops, I reached out and asked them specifically, can you sit down with me? I will bring you a gift card and talk about how viable my project would be. So that was the very first step I took before I got any equipment, before I decided which percentage of coffee versus grain I would use. I wanted to make sure that the project I was creating could actually be used in my community. There are tons of small businesses who depend on garbage removal. And instead, my husband and I are still picking up the spent grain. We're still picking up the coffee grounds to eliminate that cost for my community, for local businesses just like me. Do you have any other questions? That's really the big part. Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. The more that you do that, the easier it'll be to meet these community-wide goals and for your project to have impact. I gave a presentation not that long ago about SARE, and I met someone there who was already interested in growing mushrooms. And because of my presentation, we're able to really understand how viable it could be for their farm, not only to grow the mushrooms, but also to have a byproduct of mushroom compost. So at the very end, when the mushroom comes off, it's called a flush. So you can actually cut the mushroom and sell it, eat it. But at the base of it, the substrate that's been fully colonized by that kind of mushroom, let's say it's oyster or lion's mane, it can actually be used again in the garden. Much more sustainable option than dumping into plastic bags and then into the landfill, which is full, in case you didn't know. Oh, I see another question. Did I ask coffee shops? Letter of support. Ooh, that's a great question. I asked other farmers, but letters of support go a long way because it demonstrates how collaborative you can be and how much you've thought about it ahead of time. I know that for some farmers I talked to, I went to the Purdue Extension Small Farmers Conference, and I talked to other farmers who had done a SARE grant, and I think that topic came up pretty easily, that if you can work with other farmers and get their feedback, SARE is interested because there's a viability conversation happening. Will people use this information? So the letters of support amplified it, confirmed that the information, the question I was asking, people were seeking that answer. Definitely. Yeah, we've got about 15 more minutes. I want to make sure if there are any other questions specifically about my project or about SARE, I'd love to answer them. You can drop them in the chat or raise your hand.
I'll ask one to keep the juices flowing here. Lauren, okay, I think I have an idea. I just don't know if I should really reach out to SARE. I don't know if I should pursue it. What's your advice to me?
I would talk to some other farmers and ranchers. I would go onto the website and type in some keywords from my idea to see if there are other projects like it. And if there aren't any, then I would reach out. If there are, I would read those and make sure that they aren't already answering my question. And if they are, I would narrow it to North Central to make sure that they aren't in my region, so that I have more reason to apply. But I think overall, keep talking about it, keep researching. Maybe it takes you 20 hours to really nail down what part of the question you want to answer. Thanks, Liz. Do you have more questions? I feel like you do.
Oh, I always have like 15 questions. That's my mode. But
Yeah.
Glenda has a question first. She says, is there a known reason why Indiana farmers haven't used this program?
Awareness. I think people didn't know. That's a lot of it.
I think that's true. I think in other states, sustainable farming and local food just has like more momentum and more people are doing it. And so they tell each other about the grants and then more people apply. And so, yeah, at least when I served on the committee, there weren't as many applications coming from Indiana as there were from Wisconsin or Minnesota or Ohio. So let's change that.
Yeah, and I think it's so exciting actually, because that means your project has more of a reason to get approved. I mean, that's thrilling. And the awareness of it and timing. So because it's due in December, that might not be the best time of year for them to do this. And because there is a sense of reimbursement. If you've never done that before, where you don't have the collateral or the working capital to pay upfront, that also might be a deterrent. And Liz pointing out like the history of Indiana is just telling us that there have been plenty of farmers who've done experiments on their farm and just didn't tell SARE also. So there's also that component where there are probably farmers doing projects like this, but they just don't understand that SARE could fund it and that information could then become open source for their community.
And then I was just going to ask, is there anybody else on the call who's received a SARE grant who wanted to share maybe anything about their experience or any advice for people who are thinking about applying? No is fine.
Hello.
Oh, hey, Denise.
Hey, this is Denise, and I'm just going to piggyback on what John said. Is that, and Lauren, everybody. I feel as though out of the grants that are out there, SARE to me is a good one to kind of start with, because also if you do go to the site like Lauren, if you have pulled up the site, you will see that there's different ones besides like the Farmer Rancher. There's a youth educator. So actually, you know, the SARE, they try to touch on everything that small or farmers would be doing to give you that opportunity. Like Lauren said, a lot of times we are doing a lot of research and trial and error and teaching and showing and experimenting. And I don't think that you should be scared of the SARE, because out of all the grants, even to the point of reporting, it's really not anything to be afraid of. And it's a very good grant, I think, to start with if you're wanting to fund your farm in the future with grants, or even partner with other people for grants, because there is so much assistance and so much help there for you. For us, as far as the outreach, knowing about the SARE grant, we actually was on the airplane coming from a farmers conference, and somebody from Missouri told us about it. So, you know, I think that with us who have received, and especially the BIPOC farmers who in Indiana and the Midwest who has received it, this is an excellent way to get the word out. And I thank you guys for doing this, because it is something that I think is very attainable.
Brilliant, as usual, Denise. Very attainable, tons of help, great way to get started. And I would even second that in the sense that when we as Black, Indigenous, and farmers of color can have an opportunity that isn't too demanding, that's actually in balance with output and input, I think it's a great way for us to imagine our farms being that way, like always. And it made me think immediately about who convinced me to do it. And it was other farmers talking about what they could do if they had access to compost, right? So the conversation wasn't even about the mushrooms. It was about the mushroom compost and what comes out of that for farmers to reinvigorate and, like I said, remediate their soil. I'd like to shout out NCRS. I'd like to shout out Urban Health, right? Because they also have resources that could have helped along the way, testings and data and being able to meet with them and talk. But SARE really, at the conference, they were there to talk, and throughout the process, they gave plenty of incentive to continue and to get the project complete. I actually created my materials in Canva. So if you're feeling nervous about creating something fancy or hesitant around something looking good enough, I used Canva. One of the models, the templates in Canva helped me create the manual pages. So I think that in and of itself speaks to the apps and the work that can be done in some familiar programs, not just on the management system that you'll be a part of once you submit your application.
Lauren, if I can, that's a great reminder that so the application itself, and Denise, you made me think of this actually, is it's meant to be farmer friendly. So you can like type up your answers in Word or whatever you use, right? And then you just copy and paste your answers in. And I remember serving on the selection committee, and I remember them saying like, look, we're not judging people on whether or not they're good grant writers. Like, are they eloquent? Do they use $5 words? But the question is like, do they have an innovative idea that they've figured out a way to test it or trial it, and they're going to share what they learn with others. Make a manual using a free online service like Canva, or host a field day or whatever. And that just made such an impression on me. Like, oh, they don't need people to be good at grant writing. They need people to be good at farming and like testing cool ideas and sharing it with their neighbors. Oh, I wanted to end, I missed a question in the chat. Urban Ag asked, how did the grant help you connect deeper to other growers in your community?
I had something to offer. Like I said before, I was able to say, I'll give you $20 to chat with me. And I'll give you some free mushroom compost at the end. So the backing part, I really think as a Black farmer, I need investment more than anything. So for SARE to say, we'll give you the money up front so that you can get started, that really propelled and gave me the confidence to ask these questions of maybe farmers who were kind of interested, but certainly didn't know the breadth of what SARE was. So I got to not only talk about my project, but also talk about SARE, and it encouraged other farmers to apply also. Good question.
Yeah, if I can piggyback on that with ours, it gave us the opportunity to further collaborate with other farmers. You know, with ours, we were working kind of with the youth and other organizations that maybe didn't want to do it or couldn't do conventional growing. But at the same time, it built a relationship and partnership with us and other communities that's not around us and other farmers. So that partnership and cooperation and networking was really good in working with our grant.
Yeah, and that's the last part I wanted to mention. So after I posted my final report on the website, I actually had a few people reach out to me to publish a longer report where I would talk more about it, and they said they would pay me to do it. So again, it's just another opportunity to kind of foster a new definition as a farmer, as a youth leader, that the work you're doing has impact and it's measurable, not just in quantity, but in quality, that qualitative measure has value and it really can be invested. Like you can invest in those outcomes, and SARE's willing and interested to do that.
And whatever you do is truly an investment into your operation at the end of the day.
%100%.
Beautifully said, everybody. I will do the official, like, holy cow, this was amazing. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everyone who participated and threw out questions and ideas, and Denise and John for sharing your experience. I want to say thank you to the people who made tonight happen. So SARE actually gave us a little grant so we could pay Lauren for sharing her expertise. Thank you, SARE. Thank you to the People's Market and Legacy Taste of the Garden and Faith CDC, who are all BIPOC-led organizations in the state that care about food and farming and help make this happen and said, hey, we need to do something like this. And thank you guys for coming. If you have more questions, stick around and ask. We've got just a couple more minutes, but if people need to go, that's okay too.
Thank you, Glenda, Mia. Thank you. Mhm.
Tell you what, I'll end the recording. That way, if people want to stick around, they're good. Okay.
Fancy.
Or I'll try to. Hold on. There we go. Okay, so we are joined now by two fantastic farmers from Indy. I'm gonna let you all introduce yourselves, and maybe just to start with, tell us about your farm.
Okay, I'll start. My name is Vivian Muhammad, and our farm, we have 2 urban acres in the city of Indianapolis, which we call the Elephant Gardens. We named it that because elephants are fiercely loyal to their community, and we've been in this community. We've been literally in this community for 50 plus years, since 1970. So we've worked and lived in this area for a long time. Elephants are herbivores, and so they have a big footprint, but it's green. And and elephants are fiercely loyal to their children and fiercely protective of their youth or children. And for us, we always envisioned involving the youth of our community in our program as a long-term goal. And so we just thought that the elephant was a nice symbol for an urban agriculture adventure. And I'm just one half of the team, so I'll let my mother introduce herself.
And I guess I'm the other half. Can't say the better half, but the other half.
Absolutely
and
better.
It's not only just us, it's our entire family is part of the Elephant Gardens. My grandsons, my granddaughter, my great-grandchildren, everybody has a input in what happens at the Elephant Gardens. So that's who we are.
Your name?
Oh, my name, I'm sorry. That's a secret. My name is Joyce Randolph.
Well, I am so glad to be with you guys tonight and be able to learn from you. So what if, tell us, since this is all about applying for SARE grants, start by
Yes.
telling us what you guys did, what your SARE grant was, what it paid for, and what the goal was.
Well, the goal was 2 or 3-fold. We submitted an application to basically improve our soil and to do some testing on whether or not certain applications would produce either better fruit or more vegetables or nutrient dense vegetables. So we used a whole lot of different organic amendments, and that was also in the greenhouse as well as in the actual soil, to see if there was a difference in the produce in any way, if we could volumize, if we could optimize, whatever. We wanted to see what kind of effect we would have. And the other part of it was just how we could better impact our community by a health and beauty bodega and outfitting our farm stand. And so our farm stand was just a plain little box that we had built on the back of a trailer, and we had the idea of making it our the Elephant Gardens mobile pharmacy. So we wanted some caricatures of my mother and I with little lab coats on to play on the idea of mobile pharmacy. So part of the grant was to fund that, but it was more, the idea was to take eating healthy and kind of make it sexy, I guess, and see if we could reach more of our people that way. And what I mean by our people is the people of our neighborhood and community that we serve. We're in a food desert, but we had in the past we had sponsored or co-sponsored some farmers markets. And these farmers markets were kind of lukewarm in their reception. And we were like, what's the deal? Because of course we thought on the front end, we don't have vegetables and fruit in the neighborhood. We're going to bring a farmer's market to our neighborhood. So we thought it would just be bustling, like some of the other farmers markets with people would just come, and it wasn't that way. And so we had to sit back and go, Why? Well, there are some logistic reasons why. They had to do with the frequency of which in which we held the markets. We were only doing them on a monthly basis, so that was part of it. But we really felt like part of it was that we really didn't translate the idea of why we should buy more fruits and vegetables and eat more fruits and vegetables to our community. And you know, we hear eat healthy and all that, and it just doesn't resonate as much as we would want it to on its face. And so the idea was to use the grant money to help us to frame eating healthy in different ways. One way was our mobile pharmacy. The other was our health and beauty bodega. And the background there had to do with we had a little shed. We have a shed, I should say. And what we wanted to do with it was to transform the inside of it into a little shop that had, of course, our healthy produce, but also posters that showed, you know, why you should eat healthy as it pertained to your hair and your skin and your nails and all of those other vain things that that really do resonate with our community. So we thought we could kind of merge the two. And that idea was really born off of the fact that we used to be in the hair care industry. We used to manufacture hair care products. And we always talked, Mother and I, about the hypocrisy because it's called the health and beauty aids industry, but they never talked about health. It was always just beauty aids. Every hair show we went to, you know, it was always just about external applications. And no one ever really delved into the fact that most of hair growth had to do with what you ate and what you didn't eat. And so we decided to flip it since we're now dealing with food and kind of incorporate the beauty aspect back into the health. So the SARE grant was used to help us to develop that idea, to take it at least a step further than what we had. So now we have this mobile pharmacy that has caricatures of my mother and I on the front, you know, with our little lab coats. And it really was and is a big hit, if you will, in terms of the draw. And the health and beauty bodega has on the outside, like, you know, cucumbers with sparkling teeth and, you know, hot peppers with nails that are shiny and all kinds of little ways of kind of conveying this idea of eating healthy. So our grant really covered two separate, distinct types of ideas. One was to make eating healthy sexy. So a lot of the funds were used to help develop that idea. And then the other part was the using soil amendments and playing around. The other part was more experimental. We wanted to see if we did apply certain soil amendments, what impact it would have on the soil. And if that impact would translate into a more nutrient dense or better vegetables in size, quantity, whatever. We added, we bought a lot of, we started using azomite. And the reason we used it was because years ago, I worked at a health food store and had come across an article about selenium in diets and how deficiencies in it are how they treated AIDS patients with selenium and literally cured them because selenium helps to build T cells. It helps to build, matter of fact, you can't really build T cells in the body if there's a selenium deficiency. It's rare to have a selenium deficiency, but these days we do because a lot of our vegetables are just not as nutrient dense as they used to be. So I searched the internet for ways to find, get organic selenium into my soil and came across azomite, which basically provides a lot of micronutrients, not just selenium, to the soil. So we started mixing some of that in our rows. And to our surprise, the result of it was that we had more yield and bigger yield. Now, there was another component to that, and that was that instead of doing intensive gardening where you really put a lot of nutrients into the soil, but you
jam-pack the plants kind of, we stopped doing that and we went back to really spreading them far apart. So we matter of fact, we planted a third of the peppers that we normally would grow, and we doubled our yield. And so that was one of the, and see, without the SARE grant, we wouldn't have really been able to play around with that as much, because, you know, these organic nutrients and amendments and things, they are costly, and soil tests are costly. Being able to have the funds to be able to play around with that and find that out was really beneficial for us. And so that was kind of the scope of what we were trying to do.
That is so neat, you guys. It sounds like you really were testing out different inputs on both fronts, really, right? Yeah. Inputs to the soil, but also inputs to the community, right? Like what's going to turn into more vegetables and more nutrient density? What's going to turn into more excited eaters?
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
So neat. That's so neat.
We wanted to, and I, and Mother and I, we worked on the grant for, you know, the right after the fall, started kind of putting it together. But I'll let you ask your question, because you might end up.
Well, you read my mind. Yeah, that's what I've got a little list here. And one was like, what was it like writing that application? Was that hard? Who did you get help from, or did you just work with the two of you?
It was mainly the two of us. We did need a little input. We asked, and you probably know John Jamerson and Denise with Legacy of the Taste. They're really good with grants, so we did, and they had received a SARE grant before. So we kind of reviewed some of the past winners and awardees, I should say, and what they did and what they wrote. And then from that part, we just winged it. And I mentioned to you that John and Denise Jamerson were helpful in the sense that they had already received one, I think, the year prior. So reviewing theirs and what they, how they answered the questions kind of guided us into, and reviewing some of the other awardees in general was very helpful in, okay, this is what they expect, this is what they want. So that guidance was really key. And then I think the most challenging part of the grant is always the budget and making sure that your numbers line up and, you know, your ask correlates, and then there's a timeline. The only difficulty with this particular grant, in my mind, is the breakout over the 3 years, because it's really, you get some the first year, then you get the rest the second year, and the third year is a reimbursement year. So that part, it's kind of, they give it to you in 3 parts. So that was just mapping that out, like how we were going to do that, what we were going to try to tackle year 1, what we were going to try to tackle year 2, and, you know, that really was the most challenging part about it. But we managed, obviously. Yeah. And then COVID hit.
And then COVID. Well, okay, so that's actually one of my next questions is sort of, once you got the grant, how did it go? Did it go off without a hitch? Did you hit big obstacles? Did you adapt as you went?
We had to adapt. COVID hit, it changed a lot of the timing of things. And we ended up putting a lot more money into soil amendments. And then we ended up using different soil amendments, because once we did our soil test, we had in our grant that we were going to use alfalfa. We use that even now. Sometimes we'll prep our fall garden by adding alfalfa meal and turning it into our soil. We found by accident the worms loved it. And so we were like, oh, okay, well, we'll start doing this since they love that. But when we did our soil test, we found that we did not need any K of the NPK K, we didn't need any K, and the potassium. And we had a large amount of potassium in the soil. Alfalfa meal, though it's mainly we use it for the nitrogen, it does have potassium in it, and so about equal parts. And so we needed a different source of nitrogen. So we had to modify certain things in the grant according to what we ended up using. I think we ended up using feather meal, which I like better anyway. Well, I like better as a nitrogen source. Let me qualify that. And organic nitrogen source. So we had some changes there, but our big change came to in terms of timing and what we were going to do because COVID hit, and it really kind of changed even our market strategy and how we were going to do things. We had an idea, we were going to do recipe cards and things like that to service our clients, but we frankly, that didn't happen how we wanted it to do, because we did do recipe cards, but we truncated it and just did recipe cards for a few things versus all the things, which is what we had intended. And of course, the health and beauty bodega, which was intended to be, come inside, but it's a little bitty, house, it's not a big space. And with COVID, and nobody was coming inside. Nobody was, wanting to be in a very close environment like that. So we had to recalibrate how we use the health and beauty bodega, and didn't really fully implement it the way we had envisioned because of COVID. Everything was outdoors. Another thing we changed was that, and this was for the better, we ended up using the pharmacy more on site, whereas we were going to take it around to senior living facilities and do some other things, but that got put on hold because the senior living facilities got hit hard with COVID, and they didn't want anybody on, coming. And so COVID caused us to have to modify certain small aspects of the grant, not the overall general thrust of it, but the implementation and the timing of it definitely got switched around. Luckily, to their credit, the SARE staff that worked with us, especially at the very end when you do your last budget report, they worked with us on how to reshuffle things, because we didn't end up buying the alfalfa as much of it anyway. So we had to, what did we buy? But the good thing was that they helped us through that process, because it could have been a little daunting trying to recalibrate that.
That's one thing that I really appreciate about the SARE folks, is it's very realistic about farms' worlds. There's so much outside of our control.
That stuff happens.
Yeah. That's a good way to say it. Okay, let's see. What is next on my question list here, though? Okay, well, this is a big one, right? Because this webinar is specifically focused on Black, Indigenous, and people of color who have applied for and received SARE grants. How do you think that your intersectional identities as women and as Black farmers and as urban farmers really benefited this project? What strengths did it draw on or highlight?
Well, I think that it allowed for us to frankly get the grant in the first place, in the sense that our target was something that was a little new. The SARE grant looks for originality in ideas, and I think that our goal, because we were focused on, as African Americans, how do I reach African Americans? How do we put a dent in this hot fries addiction and Faygo pop addiction? Because it's just real. I mean, there's gas stations on every corner. We don't have grocery stores, and the ones that we do have everything's high as a kite, because they know they can charge more. It's cheaper food, but they charge more. And so we have that dilemma. But you got cheap food, junk food, which is high in calories and very low in nutrients, you know, what they call the empty calories. We have a whole lot of access to that. So that is actually what framed our thought process. So it turns out that being Black women in an urban environment where there's a food desert, that all of that really caused us to pull on some creativity. And that probably in turn helped us get the grant because of the fact that they were looking for some new ideas on an old topic. And so I think the desperation we have to try to, you know, get, you know, more healthy produce into the mouths of our people really helped us to shape the grant, you know, because we were forced to get a little creative. And I think that in turn helped us to get it. So I think that one aspect has been a help in us getting the grant. I also, in hindsight, we felt like our ask was kind of, I guess you could say, it foreshadowed COVID and the problems that happened with our neighborhood, because we talked about what we see, which is comorbidities out the roof. You know, high blood pressure, heart disease, name your poison, diabetes, childhood diabetes. It runs rampant in our neighborhood precisely because of the availability of fast food, junk food, and the addictive nature of those, you know, because I've heard comments about, well, you know, that's what they want. That's what they ask for. And it's like, yeah, they do ask for that because they're addicted to it, you know. It doesn't start off that way. That's a training. That's something. And so it does make our job harder to untrain, to undo really addictions, because this stuff, and the thing about it is it's cheaper. You know, I got $3.50 on my pound of tomatoes or some hot fries and a soda. You know, I'm gonna go for that pleasure, you know, and addictive pleasure at that. So having to combat that is always on our minds. And so I think as urban growers, Black growers, in this environment, not just an urban grower, but an urban grower in an area in desperate need of nutrient dense produce. It's what drove us to try to find ways to put more nutrients in our food. And I think when COVID happened, and to make eating healthy more sexy. So when COVID happened, it was like a validation almost, because 40% of the people that died from COVID were diabetics. And a lot of people don't know that statistic, that there was a direct correlation. 40% is a huge number. And there's no coincidence that 40% of those that ended up dying from COVID after contracting it were diabetics. That tells us that, you know, we need to deal more directly with diabetes, because it leaves the body in a very vulnerable position. In our neighborhood, it's just rampant with diabetics, and the same for heart disease and all the other comorbidities. And we spoke about all those things in the grant, and our desire to try to combat that, but how we needed to make eating healthy a little bit more sexy. Yeah, so there you have it.
Beautifully said, Vivian. I'm glad you shared. Thank you. Let me ask you, Joyce, what, zooming out, thinking about the whole project, did you have a favorite part, or a part where you felt like it just made you come alive, or helped you grow your farm in a way that excited you?
I think the most exciting thing that has transpired me personally over the last couple of years was the ability to have our on-site farmers market, and being able to actually serve the people in our community locally grown organic fruits and vegetables, and working the farm stand, being able to have a one-on-one conversation with the residents in our area, who a lot of times will say, well, yeah, I got diabetes and, I like to eat so and so and so and so, but, and I'd say, but okay, so I got diabetes too. So let me tell you what we can do to adjust what you're eating. You can still have great things. People think, oh, you're a vegetarian. What do you eat all the time? Salad? And it's like, no, and then that gives us an opportunity to introduce them to like an eggplant. Okay. What do you do with an eggplant? And so to have those conversations about things that people kind of frown down upon or don't really think of as, we've had people say, oh, well, that's a white people's food. No, it's not. The plant doesn't decide who eats it. It grows and anyone is welcome to eat it. Various ways to fix carrots, how to make green beans appeal to everybody. I can't imagine a meal without a green bean. I love them. So I think just being able to have that one-on-one with our neighbors, because, once we started opening back up after COVID, we were able to then bring up the fact that, okay, you have this and you survived COVID. Now let me show you some other ways that can improve your diet so that if this comes back around, it won't hit you again like it did that time, and I think that's really the main thing that has really, helped me to understand why it's so important for us to have the elephant gardens and to make it available to our neighborhood. We don't go to like other farmers markets and set up our farm stand. Our goal is to help the people in our neighborhood. And because we are definitely in a food desert, grocery stores are not in walking distance. Even the ones that are within a 6 or 7 block area, they don't provide healthy food. And if they do provide organic food, it's at an exorbitant price. So I think that's the main thing that I have to offer.
Beautifully said. Okay, well then I think my last question for you guys is words of wisdom. Like if somebody's out there thinking, maybe I have an idea that's good enough to apply, I don't know, not sure if it's worth my time, if I'll have a good enough application. What do you want to tell them?
Well, these days the buzzword in USDA and other places is socially disadvantaged, and also equitable food access, food justice, etc. I think COVID kind of highlighted or took the cover off of what we already knew existed, or at least help to exacerbate it and make it more pronounced for everyone to see the need for more people addressing those issues. And so I think if someone has an idea that is specific to that and helping in urban environments and that they're more likely to be able to get a grant, they should never say they can't do it. Because it's another thing about an idea. So if you were given an idea, just move on it. And even if you don't get the SARE grant this time, maybe there's another grant out there, or maybe the next time you will. It just needs some better help. And look over the grants that have been successful in getting money in the past, and just press repeat, in the sense of format and form, don't have to reinvent the wheel there. Just try to be original, and original doesn't mean that you're not like what we did wasn't original in certain senses. It was just the angle that we took was putting a new twist on an old idea, which is how do we get people to eat more healthy. It's not like that idea hasn't been, rolling around the heads. It's just we came at it from a different angle. So I would say that I would just encourage everyone to look over other awardee grants, confer with fellow farmers, and get feedback. It's because they may help you tweak it. They may say, well, I love that idea, but perhaps maybe you should add this or come at it from this way. So we're good at, man, I am not ashamed. I will call up Amy. I will call up anybody. I will call everybody. How do you wash lettuce without making it shrivel? How? That was, you should have seen our, oh my God. Anyway, all that to say, look, get help, ask other farmers what they're to ask. Just ask. One thing I have found about the farm community, and that's rural and urban, is that farmers like to share, and they were willing to share their information. I have never had a farmer like not give me a helping hand and say, oh, well, if I'm calling them with a problem, like, oh God, the squash bug, of course, or whatever it is, I have always gotten really good feedback from anybody that I've asked, because most growers want you to be successful. Right. So, and that's a good thing about being a grower. I've never found a negative experience with my fellow farmers. Urban or rural.
No. And I can piggyback off of what Vivian just said, that, one of the most important things is follow your ideal. And if you feel that you need some backup, some assistance, if you got a question, go ahead and ask that question, because there are a lot of urban farmers available with knowledge that are willing to share that knowledge with you. And I think that's one of the, just like we do, people are forever asking us, like, how do you do this? Or why do you put it this way, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not a competition of my urban farm against your urban farm. We're all trying to solve the same problem, which is lack of locally grown organic food. And I think as long as we stay open to each other's ideals and give each other the support we need, we all will be successful. And in the end, the goal will be met, which is to help feed the people.
Yes.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end than that.
Feed the people.
That's right. Feed the people.
I'm the right kind of food.
Yes.
Hey, wait a minute. They're brownies for dessert, though. I don't care. Pumpkin pie, carrot cake. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, what time's dessert? I'll be there.
Right. Look, I was counting on you.
That's funny. I made a little note. Carrot cake equals Vivian's favorite. So we're gonna see.
Yeah. Just no nuts, though. I have a nut allergy. That's
noted.
the only. It's always so hard for me to get carrot cake without nuts.
Yeah.
Because I have a nut allergy. I'll break out. My face will swell.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Yeah, it's not pretty.
No nuts.
Not pretty. Yeah. But still, it's this is a worthy cause. SARE has overall been extremely good experience for us, and they were helpful, the people at USDA, in walking us through the process. And so we feel very blessed and grateful to have had the experience.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad it was so positive for you guys, and it sounds like you really utilized it just in so many ways.
We did. We did.
Well, thank you for sharing about your experience and passing that goodwill on to the next person who might apply.
Yes.
You guys are awesome.
So are you.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing what you do.
I appreciate that.
It's a very big deal.
Well, I'm gonna I'm going to say goodbye for now. I'm going to get this up on the internet so that hopefully lots of people will see it and learn from y'all.
I hope so.
Yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Take care.